The alarm on my bridge screamed before I had even finished my coffee. My name is Elias Voss, and I am the commanding officer of the Harbinger's Mercy, a single human warship sitting at the very edge of a border no human vessel had ever crossed before. 3 seconds ago, my sensors had picked up a fleet of 11 alien warships closing in on my position from the Kalan Dominion, the oldest and most powerful empire in this part of the galaxy. 3 seconds ago, everything had been calm. Now it was not. "Commander, they are hailing us," said Grace Whitfield, my communications officer, her fingers already moving across her console. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tightness underneath it. She had never faced a first contact situation like this one. None of us had. This was new for everyone on this ship, and it was new for the galaxy too. "Put them through," I said, standing from my chair. The view screen flickered, and an alien face appeared. He was tall, with skin the color of pale copper, and eyes that shifted between violet and gold, depending on the angle of the light. He wore a uniform heavy with metals, the kind of uniform that suggested centuries of ceremony, rather than centuries of combat. His name, according to our translators, was Fleet Marshal Doran Vex, and he commanded the border defense of the Kalan Dominion. "Unknown vessel," he said, his voice smooth and almost bored. "You have entered restricted Dominion space. Identify yourself and state your intentions immediately." I did not sit back down. I wanted him to see me standing, calm, and completely unafraid. "I am Commander Elias Voss, of the human vessel Harbinger's Mercy," I said. "I am not here to start a fight. I am here to stop one before it begins. I need to speak with whoever holds authority over your colonial expansion into the Ashland Corridor." Fleet Marshal Vex tilted his head, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face that I would later understand was pure disbelief. Not fear, not caution. Disbelief, as if a child had walked into his war room and demanded to negotiate terms with the adults. "The Ashland Corridor belongs to the Kalan Dominion," he said. "It has belonged to us for over 4,000 years. I am not sure what claim your species believes it has, but I would advise you to turn your ship around before this becomes an incident. That corridor borders 3 systems my people consider essential to our survival," I said. "We are not asking you to give it up as a gift. We are telling you, as a courtesy, that continued expansion into that region will be treated as a direct threat to humanity. I am here to deliver that message in person, because I wanted you to understand that this is not a bluff, and it is not a misunderstanding." There was a pause. On the bridge behind Fleet Marshal Vex, I could see other officers exchanging glances, the kind of glances people share when they think someone has made a joke that landed poorly. "You are a single ship," Vex said slowly, as if explaining something to someone who might not understand basic mathematics. "I have 11 warships within striking range of your position. Do you understand the position you have placed yourself in?" "I understand it perfectly," I said. "That is exactly why I am here alone." I let that sentence sit in the silence for a moment before continuing. "Fleet Marshal, your empire has existed for 4,000 years without a single major war. I know this. My analysts know this. Your last serious conflict was resolved through treaty, before either side lost a ship. I respect that history. It tells me you value peace more than conquest, and that is a rare thing in this galaxy. But it also tells me you may not fully understand what you are dealing with when you look at my ship and see only one vessel instead of an entire civilization standing behind it." "Is that a threat, Commander?" Vex asked, his tone sharpening for the first time. "No," I said. "It is a warning. There is a difference, and I hope for your sake that your people understand that difference before it is too late to matter." Behind me, I heard Grace shift slightly in her seat. Owen Bennett, my tactical officer, kept his eyes locked on his console, monitoring the 11 Dominion ships as they held their position just outside effective engagement range. Nobody on my bridge moved. Nobody spoke. We had trained for this moment for months, and now that it was here, the only thing left to do was let it play out exactly as we had planned. "You said you wished to speak with someone regarding colonial policy," Vex said finally, his voice returning to its earlier smoothness, though something colder had settled beneath it now. "That is not a decision within my authority. That authority rests with the Dominion Council on Kalan Prime." "Then arrange the meeting," I said. "I am not asking for a favor, Fleet Marshal. I am giving your empire the chance to avoid a mistake that cannot be undone. I would encourage you to move quickly. My patience for diplomacy has a limit, and I suspect your council's patience for hearing hard truths might be even shorter than mine. Vex studied me for a long moment through the screen. I could see him trying to read me, trying to find the bluff, the trick, the hidden fleet, waiting just beyond sensor range. He would not find one. There was no hidden fleet. There was only me, my ship, and a message that needed to be delivered before it was too late for anyone to walk away clean. I will relay your request, he said at last. Do not move from this position, Commander, and do not test the patience of the Dominion. We have shown restraint by not opening fire on an unidentified vessel that entered our space without permission. That restraint has limits as well. The screen went dark. I finally allowed myself to sit back down, and I noticed my hands were steady. That surprised me a little. Grace turned to look at me, her expression caught somewhere between relief and disbelief that we had survived the first exchange without a single shot fired. That went about as well as it could have, she said quietly. It went exactly as I expected, I said. They think we are posturing. They think this is theater, the kind of theater their diplomats have played for centuries, with every species they have ever encountered. They have never met anyone who says exactly what they mean, and means exactly what they say. Owen finally looked up from his console. Commander, all 11 of their ships just repositioned. They didn't retreat, but they didn't advance either. They're holding a defensive formation around us, like they're worried we might do something unpredictable. Good, I said. Let them be worried. Worried is better than certain. Certain is what gets people killed. I stood again and walked toward the front viewport, looking out at the stars beyond the 11 alien warships that surrounded my single vessel. Somewhere beyond those stars was an entire empire that had never fought a real war, an empire that measured its history in centuries of careful diplomacy and cautious treaties. They had built something beautiful and lasting through patience and negotiation, and I did not want to be the one who tore that apart. But I also knew my orders, and I knew what would happen if this warning was ignored. Grace, I said without turning around, send the full data packet to command. Let them know contact has been made, and let them know the Dominion has not yet decided how seriously to take us. Already sending it, she replied. Behind me, I could hear the quiet hum of the ship's systems, the gentle vibration of engines that could, if given the order, unleash more destructive power than this entire region of space had seen in living memory. I hoped it would never come to that. I hoped the Dominion Council would listen, would understand, would choose the wiser path before pride and old assumptions pushed them somewhere they could not return from. But hope, I had learned a long time ago, was not a strategy. It was only a wish standing in the doorway of a much harder truth. 3 hours passed before Fleet Marshal Vex contacted us again. In that time, my crew ran diagnostics, monitored the 11 ships surrounding us, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that we were, technically, completely alone this deep into hostile territory. Daniel Cole, my chief engineer, spent most of that time in the lower decks, running redundant checks on our defense systems, just in case diplomacy failed and we needed every advantage we could get. When the call finally came through, it was not Vex on the screen. It was someone new, someone with a more elaborate uniform, and an expression that suggested he was used to being listened to without argument. Commander Voss, the new alien said, I am Counselor Ethan Sorrell, speaking on behalf of the Dominion Council. Fleet Marshal Vex has informed us of your request. I must say, it is highly unusual for a single vessel to demand an audience with the Council regarding matters of colonial expansion. I understand it is unusual, I said, but the situation itself is unusual, and I believe it deserves your Council's direct attention, rather than being passed down through layers of bureaucracy until the urgency of the message is lost. Counselor Sorrell's expression did not change, but I noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, the kind of expression people wear when they are being told something they do not want to hear, but are too polite, or too proud, to say so directly. The Council has reviewed the coordinates you referenced, he said. The Ashland Corridor has been under formal Dominion survey and settlement planning for the last 6 years. Our colonial fleet is scheduled to begin full expansion within the coming months. This has been a matter of public record within our empire for quite some time. I understand that as well, I said. and I understand that from your perspective, this expansion follows all of your own laws and traditions perfectly. But those three systems bordering the corridor are not empty space to us. They sit along a supply route that humanity considers vital to the survival of several of our outer colonies. If your settlement fleet moves into that corridor, our supply lines will be cut, and our people will suffer for it. Then perhaps, Sorel said, his tone shifting into something more clearly condescending now, your people should have expanded into that region themselves, before we did. The Dominion does not reward those who arrive late to a claim with special consideration, Commander. That is simply not how galactic law functions, and it is not how it has ever functioned. I am not asking for special consideration, I said, keeping my voice level despite the frustration building quietly beneath my ribs. I am telling you, clearly and honestly, that if your fleet moves into that corridor, humanity will respond with force sufficient to remove that threat entirely. I am giving you the chance to avoid that outcome by choosing a different path for your expansion. There is an entire galaxy out there, Counselor. Surely there is another direction your empire can grow into. Counselor Sorel actually smiled at that. A small, tight smile that told me everything about how this conversation was being received on his end. Commander Voss, he said, the Kalan Dominion has existed for over 4,000 years. We have negotiated treaties with over 300 distinct species. We have resolved every serious dispute in our history through diplomacy, patience, and mutual respect. I understand that your species is young, and perhaps unfamiliar with how civilized negotiation functions between advanced empires. But I assure you, threats of force are not how disputes are settled among the great powers of this galaxy. I felt something settle in my chest, something cold and certain, the feeling of a door quietly closing somewhere far away. I am not simply making a threat, Counselor, I said. I am telling you what will happen, as clearly and as honestly as I know how. Humanity does not negotiate the way your empire negotiates. We do not have 4,000 years of careful treaties to fall back on. We have learned, through hard experience, that clarity prevents tragedy far better than politeness does. I would rather you think me rude today than mourn something far worse tomorrow. Are you finished, Commander? Sorel asked, his patience clearly running thin now. Almost, I said. I want to give your council 7 days. 7 days to review your expansion plans and choose a different direction for your colonial fleet. If, after 7 days, your ships still move toward the Ashland corridor, I will consider that decision final, and I will act according to my orders. I sincerely hope you use those 7 days wisely. The counselor's expression finally cracked, just slightly, into something that looked almost like anger. You dare set a deadline for the Kalan Dominion Council, he said. You, a single ship, alone at the edge of our territory, believe you have the authority to issue an ultimatum to an empire that has stood for 4 millennia. I do not believe I have that authority, I said quietly. I know I have it. There is a difference, Counselor, and I would strongly advise your council to understand that difference before your 7 days run out. The screen went dark again, faster this time. The connection cut from his side rather than mine. I stood alone on my bridge for a long moment, staring at the empty screen, feeling the weight of the 7 days I had just promised settle over the ship like a held breath. Grace did not speak. Owen did not speak. Even Daniel, who had come up from engineering just in time to hear the last part of the conversation, stood silently near the back of the bridge, his eyes fixed on me. Do you think they'll listen? Grace finally asked, her voice quiet. I turned to look at her, and at the rest of my crew, each of them waiting for an answer I was not entirely certain I had. I think, I said slowly, that an empire which has never faced a real war has forgotten what one costs. I think they believe their 4,000 years of peace makes them wise. But peace without understanding is not wisdom. It is simply luck that has not yet run out. I walked back to my chair and sat down, feeling the quiet hum of the ship around me, feeling the 11 Dominion warships still holding their position just beyond our hull. We wait, I said. 7 days. We monitor everything. We prepare for everything. And we hope, against everything I have just seen in that counselor's eyes, that hope is not wasted on people who have already made up their minds. Nobody on the bridge said anything else for a long time. Outside the viewport, the stars remained exactly as still and silent as they had been before any of this began, utterly indifferent to the 7 days that had just started ticking away, and to the storm that all of us now understood was gathering somewhere far beyond what any of their scans could yet detect. On Kalen Prime, in a chamber built from pale stone quarried before humanity had learned to write, the Dominion Council gathered to discuss what they still refused to call a threat. I was not present for this meeting, of course. I learned of its details much later, through records that were eventually shared with human intelligence, once the dust of everything that followed had settled. But I have read the transcripts enough times now that I feel as though I stood in that chamber myself, watching a civilization talk itself into a mistake it could have avoided. The chamber held 12 seats arranged in a wide circle, each one representing a different founding world of the Dominion. At the center stood a raised platform, where Counselor Ethan Sorrell addressed the gathered members, his voice carrying easily across the polished stone floor. "The human commander has issued what she calls a warning," Sorrell said, "though of course I am not a woman, and this detail suggests the translation records were imperfect even in their own archives. She claims that continued colonial expansion into the Ashland Corridor will be treated as an act of aggression against her species." A counselor near the far side of the circle, an elder named Braxa Vol, who represented one of the Dominion's oldest founding worlds, leaned forward with visible skepticism. "A single ship making demands of an entire empire," she said. "This is not diplomacy, Ethan. This is theater." "Perhaps her species does this often, testing boundaries to see what they might gain through bluster rather than negotiation." "That was my assessment as well," Sorrell replied. "However, I feel I should note that her tone did not carry the usual markers of a negotiating tactic. There was no request for concessions, no offer of trade or compromise, simply a statement of what would happen, delivered with what I can only describe as complete certainty." "Certainty is not the same as capability," said another counselor, a younger member named Thessa Corin, who had only recently taken her seat among the 12. "We have encountered posturing before. The Yevrik cluster threatened war against us 3 centuries ago over a mining dispute, and when we did not yield, they backed down within a single season. Perhaps humanity will do the same." I have often wondered, reading these transcripts, whether anyone in that chamber paused to consider what made this situation different. The Yevrik cluster had issued their threats through layers of diplomats, through months of careful negotiation, through the slow and deliberate process that every species in this region of the galaxy had learned to expect from one another. Humanity had sent 1 ship, 1 commander, and 1 deadline. There was no negotiation offered. There was no room built into the warning for a counteroffer. And nobody in that chamber seemed to notice how strange that absence truly was. "I have reviewed what limited data we possess on human military history," said an older counselor near the back of the circle, a scholar named Perrin Octa, who had spent much of his long life studying species beyond Dominion borders. "Their conflicts, from what our observers have gathered, tend to end quickly once they begin, not because humans lack the will to fight, but because they appear to commit overwhelming resources at the very start of a conflict, rather than allowing it to develop slowly, as our own history has taught us to expect from any dispute between civilized powers." "You are suggesting we take this seriously," Sorrell said, though his tone made it clear he considered the suggestion somewhat excessive. "I am suggesting," Octe replied carefully, "that we do not yet understand this species well enough to dismiss their warning so easily. 4,000 years of peace has taught the Dominion many valuable lessons, but it has also left us without recent experience in recognizing genuine danger when it does not resemble the danger we already know." Braxa Vol waved a hand dismissively. "Perrin, you have always been overly cautious where new species are concerned. It served us well enough with the Threll ascendancy. I will grant you that. But caution cannot become our only response to every unfamiliar voice that arrives at our border. We have colonial plans that have been years in development. Are we truly meant to abandon them because 1 ship, alone, made a demand we cannot verify?" "I am not suggesting we abandon anything," Octa said. "I am suggesting we investigate further before dismissing the warning entirely. 7 days is not so long a delay that it would meaningfully damage our colonial timeline. Perhaps we use that time to gather more information rather than simply proceeding as though nothing has changed." Sorrell considered this for a long moment, and for a brief window, it seemed as though caution might win the argument. But then a fourth counselor spoke, one whose name I would later learn was Dale Marrow, a man who represented the newest of the Dominion's founding worlds, and who had built much of his political career on the promise of colonial expansion into exactly the region now under dispute. "With respect to my esteemed colleague," Marrow said, his voice smooth and practiced in the way of someone who had given this exact speech many times before, "we cannot allow a single unverified threat to halt years of careful planning. My own world has invested heavily in the infrastructure needed to support expansion into the Ashland corridor. If we delay now, we send a message to every species along our border that the Dominion can be pressured into abandoning its own interests by anyone willing to speak boldly enough. That is a far more dangerous precedent than whatever risk this human commander imagines she represents." Several counselors nodded at this, and I have often thought, reading the transcript, that this was the moment the outcome was truly decided, long before the 7 days had even finished passing. Not because anyone in that chamber was foolish, not because they lacked intelligence or wisdom, but because they were, every single one of them, products of an empire that had never needed to imagine a threat it could not eventually resolve through patience and careful words. "I propose a compromise," Sorel said finally, turning to address the full circle. "We will send a formal diplomatic response to the human commander, acknowledging her warning and inviting continued dialogue. However, our colonial fleet will proceed with preparations for expansion, as originally scheduled. If the human warning proves genuine, we will have ample time to adjust our approach before any actual conflict becomes unavoidable. If it proves to be posturing, as I suspect it will, we will have lost nothing by proceeding as planned." The vote that followed passed with only 2 dissenting voices, Paran Octe among them, quietly recorded in the transcript with what I imagine, even now, must have been a deep and unheeded sense of dread. I did not learn the outcome of that council meeting until 2 days after it occurred, when a formal diplomatic message arrived aboard the Harbinger's Mercy, delivered not by Counselor Sorel himself, but by a lower-ranking diplomat named Ilsa Voren, whose careful neutrality suggested she had been chosen specifically because she carried no personal stake in the decision being communicated. "Commander Voss," she said, her image appearing on our view screen with a formal, practiced calm, "the Dominion Council has reviewed your warning regarding colonial expansion into the Ashland corridor. The Council wishes to express its appreciation for your candor and invites continued diplomatic dialogue between our 2 civilizations in the coming months." I waited, sensing there was more to come, and there was. "However," Voren continued, "the Council has determined that our colonial fleet will proceed with its scheduled expansion timeline. Preliminary survey vessels will enter the corridor within the next several days, with full settlement operations to follow, according to our existing plans. The Council believes this approach allows for continued negotiation without unnecessarily disrupting infrastructure investments already committed to this project." I felt something settle in my chest, cold and heavy, the exact feeling I had hoped, against all reasonable expectation, that I would not feel today. "Diplomat Voren," I said, keeping my voice level, "I want to make sure I understand correctly. Your council intends to continue colonial expansion into the corridor, despite the warning I delivered directly to Counselor Sorel 3 days ago?" "The council believes there is room for continued dialogue alongside our existing plans," she said, her tone carefully neutral, though I suspected even she understood how thin that framing truly was. "There is no room for dialogue once your survey ships cross into that corridor," I said. "I was very clear about that when I spoke with Counselor Sorel. I gave your council 7 days to choose a different path. 3 of those days have already passed. I would strongly encourage you to relay to your council that this is not a negotiating position that will soften with time. It is a fixed line, and I do not have the authority to move it, even if I wished to." Voren's composure flickered, just slightly, at the certainty in my voice. "I will relay your concerns to the council," she said. "Is there anything further you wish to communicate?" I thought for a long moment before answering, choosing my words carefully, knowing that whatever I said next would likely be the last chance for anyone in that chamber to change course, before it became too late for words to matter at all. "Tell them this," I said. "Humanity does not issue warnings we do not intend to follow through on. We do not send single ships into hostile territory to bluff an empire 4,000 years older than our entire civilization. I am not here because we are weak and hoping to be taken seriously. I am here because we are certain, and I wanted your people to have every possible chance to avoid what comes next. Tell your council that the remaining 4 days are the last mercy they will receive from us." Vorin studied me for a long moment, and I saw something shift behind her eyes, something that looked, for just a moment, like genuine unease. "I will relay your message exactly as spoken, Commander," she said quietly. Load. The connection ended, and I sat alone on my bridge once more, surrounded by the quiet hum of a ship that had done everything it could to prevent what I now believed, with growing certainty, was already unavoidable. Grace turned to look at me from her station, her expression carefully neutral, though I could see the question sitting behind her eyes before she even asked it. "What happens now, Commander?" "Now," I said, "we wait for 4 more days. We continue monitoring their fleet movements, and we prepare ourselves for the strong possibility that an empire built on 4,000 years of peace is about to learn, in the span of a single week, exactly why humanity has never needed that kind of history to understand the value of keeping its word." Owen looked up from his console, his voice quiet. "And if their survey ships enter the corridor before the 7 days are finished?" I considered the question carefully before answering, feeling the full weight of what I was about to say settle over me like something physical. "Then we will know for certain," I said, "that this council believes words are only words, and that promises from a species they have never fought are simply another form of bluff to be tested and dismissed. I sincerely hope, for their sake, that they are wiser than that. But hope, as I have learned many times before, is not something I am permitted to rely on when the lives of my people are the price of being wrong." The bridge fell quiet again, and outside the viewport, the 11 Dominion warships continued their silent watch, utterly unaware that the countdown ticking away inside my ship's systems was not measuring days until a negotiation, but days until a decision that could no longer be undone. The 4th day brought news I had been dreading since the moment Diplomat Vorin's transmission ended. Owen called it out from his station with a tightness in his voice that told me he already understood what it meant before I did. "Commander, long-range sensors are picking up new contacts entering the Ashland corridor. 3 vessels, Dominion configuration, moving at survey speed rather than combat speed." I stood from my chair and walked to his console, looking down at the sensor readout myself, hoping for a moment that I had misread the situation. I had not. "Confirm their heading," I said quietly. "Confirmed," Owen said. "They are moving directly into the corridor, right through the systems you specifically warned them about. This isn't a patrol route, Commander. This is the beginning of their settlement survey." I felt the weight of that confirmation settle over me slowly, the way cold water settles into every corner of a container it has been poured into. 3 days remained before my deadline expired, and yet here they were, already moving forward, as though my warning had simply been noise, to be waited out, rather than a line drawn with genuine purpose behind it. "Grace," I said, "open a direct channel to Counselor Sorrell. I want to speak with him immediately." It took nearly 20 minutes for the connection to be established, and when Sorrell's face finally appeared on my view screen, I could see immediately that he had anticipated this call and had prepared himself for it. "Commander Voss," he said, his voice smooth in a way that felt deliberately rehearsed, "I understand you have concerns regarding our survey vessels." "Counselor, 3 of your ships just entered the Ashland corridor," I said. "I made it very clear during our last conversation that this corridor represented a fixed boundary. I gave your council 7 days to reconsider your expansion plans, and instead, on day 4, you have chosen to proceed as though nothing was said at all." "These are survey vessels, Commander, not colonial settlement ships," Sorrell replied, his tone carrying the practiced patience of someone accustomed to soothing tensions rather than confronting them directly. "They are simply gathering additional data before any final decisions are made regarding full expansion. Nothing has been finalized. Your warning remains under active consideration by the Council. That distinction does not matter to me, Counselor, and I explained that clearly during our first conversation," I said. "Any vessel entering that corridor with intent to further your colonial ambitions is a violation of the line I drew. Survey ships are simply the first step of the very expansion I warned you against. Sorel's composure flickered, just slightly, the smooth diplomatic mask cracking enough for me to glimpse something harder underneath it. Commander, I must be candid with you. The Council does not believe your warning represents a credible threat to an empire of our size and history. We have taken your concerns seriously enough to continue this dialogue, but we cannot simply halt every aspect of our colonial operations based on the demands of a single vessel that has not demonstrated any capability beyond words. You want a demonstration, I said quietly, feeling something settle into place inside me, cold and certain. I did not say that, Sorel replied quickly, perhaps sensing the sudden shift in my tone. You did not have to say it directly, Counselor, I said. Your actions have said it clearly enough. Withdraw those 3 survey vessels from the corridor immediately. This is not a request. It is the very last opportunity your council will receive to avoid the consequences I described to you 4 days ago. There was a long pause on the other end of the connection, and I watched Sorel glance briefly to something off-screen, likely another council member observing the exchange, before he answered. The council has authorized these survey vessels to complete their mission, he said finally. I understand you may not agree with this decision, Commander, but I would ask that you consider the broader implications of escalating this situation over a matter that remains, in our assessment, entirely diplomatic in nature. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, feeling something inside me settle into a place I had hoped I would not need to visit today. Counselor Sorel, I said, opening my eyes again, I want you to understand something clearly, because I believe your council still does not fully grasp what is happening here. This is not a diplomatic matter to humanity. It has never been a diplomatic matter. I came to your border alone, with a single ship, specifically because I did not want this to become anything more than a conversation. But your council has now chosen, twice, to test the boundary I described, rather than respect it. I am giving your 3 survey vessels exactly 6 hours to withdraw from the corridor. After that time, I will act according to my orders, and there will be no further warnings issued. 6 hours, Sorel repeated, his voice tightening. Commander, that is an absurdly short window for us to relay orders through appropriate channels and coordinate a fleet withdrawal. Even if the Council agreed immediately, logistics alone would require far more time than that. Then I would suggest your Council move quickly, I said. I did not choose this deadline arbitrarily, Counselor. I chose it because 6 hours is more than enough time for a fleet to reverse course, when the alternative has already been made completely clear. Do not mistake my patience for uncertainty. I have given your empire every reasonable opportunity to choose peace. What happens after those 6 hours will be a direct result of choices your council alone has made. The connection ended abruptly from his side once more, and I stood alone on my bridge, feeling the quiet weight of 6 hours stretching out ahead of me, like a long, narrow bridge, over something I could not yet see the bottom of. Grace looked at me from her station, her expression carefully composed, though I could see the tension behind her eyes. Commander, do you think they will withdraw? I considered the question honestly before answering, unwilling to offer false comfort to a crew who deserved better than that from me. I do not know, I said. I hope they do. I have hoped for that outcome since the moment we arrived at this border, but hope is a poor substitute for preparation, and I intend for this crew to be fully prepared for whatever comes at the end of those 6 hours. I turned to Owen. Bring all systems to a heightened state of readiness. I do not want anything caught unprepared if this deadline passes without a response. Already in progress, Commander, he said, his fingers moving quickly across his console. I walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars, thinking of the 3 survey vessels somewhere beyond my sensor range, moving deeper into a corridor that held far more meaning to humanity than any diplomat on Kalen Prime seemed willing to accept. I thought of Fleet Marshal Vex, standing on his own bridge somewhere among those 11 ships still surrounding my position, and I wondered whether he understood, even a little, what was coming if his council did not change course in the hours ahead. Daniel Cole appeared on the bridge sometime during the 4th hour, his uniform still marked with the grease and dust of the engine room, his expression grim but steady. Commander, all defense systems are fully operational. Whatever happens, we are ready. Thank you, Daniel, I said. I hope we do not need any of it. So do I, he said quietly, taking his place near the back of the bridge. watching the same silent stars the rest of us had been watching for hours now. The 5th hour passed with no word from Counselor Sorrel, no indication that the survey vessels had altered their course, no sign that anything on the Dominion side of this standoff had changed at all. I found myself pacing slowly near my chair, feeling the seconds tick by, with a weight I had rarely felt in all my years of service. At the beginning of the 6th hour, Grace's console chimed with an incoming transmission, and for a brief moment, hope flickered through the bridge like a held breath finally released. But it was not Sorrel. It was Fleet Marshal Vex, his expression grim and tired in a way that told me everything before he even spoke. "Commander Voss," he said, "I wanted you to hear this from me directly, rather than through official channels. The Council has voted to allow the survey vessels to complete their mission as scheduled. They believe your deadline to be an overreaction that does not warrant altering an operation already years in the planning." I felt something inside me go very still, very quiet, the way the world goes quiet in the last moment, before a great weight finally falls. "I see," I said. "Thank you for telling me yourself, Fleet Marshal. I imagine that was not an easy message to deliver." "It was not," Vex said quietly. "For what it is worth, Commander, I argued against this decision. I do not know your people well, but I have spent enough hours speaking with you now to understand that you do not make promises you do not intend to keep. I fear the Council has mistaken your patience for weakness, and I do not believe that mistake will end well for either of our peoples." "No," I said softly. "I do not believe it will either." The connection ended, and I stood alone on my bridge, watching the final minutes of the 6th hour tick away in silence, feeling the full weight of everything that was about to happen settle over me, like a held breath, finally released into the cold, indifferent stars beyond my viewport. The 6th hour ended exactly as I feared it would, with silence from Kalen Prime, and 3 survey vessels still moving steadily deeper into the Ashland corridor. I stood at the center of my bridge, feeling the entire crew's attention settle on me without a single word being spoken. This was the moment every drill, every simulation, every quiet conversation in the months leading up to this mission had been preparing us for. There was no satisfaction in it. There was only the steady, heavy certainty of a decision that had already been made long before I ever arrived at this border. "Owen," I said, my voice calm and even, "confirm the position of the 3 survey vessels." "Confirmed, Commander," he replied. "They remain on course. No change in heading or speed. They are approximately 40 minutes from reaching the first of the 3 systems in question." "And the 11 warships surrounding us?" "Holding formation, Commander. No indication they anticipate what comes next." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of what I was about to order settle across my shoulders like something physical. This was never meant to be a fight of conquest. It was never meant to punish an empire for simply being unfamiliar with a species they had never faced before. It was meant to be precise, controlled, and absolutely clear in its purpose. "Grace," I said, "open a final channel to Counselor Sorrel and Fleet Marshal Vex simultaneously. I want them both to hear this." It took only a moment for the connection to establish, and both faces appeared on my screen, Sorrel composed but tense, Vex visibly grim, in a way that told me he already suspected what this call meant. "Counselor Sorrel, Fleet Marshal Vex," I said, "the deadline I set has now passed. Your survey vessels remain in the corridor, and your council has made its choice clear through inaction. I want to be completely transparent about what happens next, because I do not believe your empire has ever faced a moment like this one, and I do not want there to be any confusion about my intentions." "Commander," Sorrel began, his voice tightening, "I would urge you to reconsider before taking any action that cannot be undone." "I have already reconsidered, Counselor, more times than I can count," I said, "and each time, I have arrived at the same conclusion. Your Empire's survey vessels will be disabled within the next several minutes. This action is not intended to destroy your ships or harm your crews beyond what is necessary to render them unable to continue their mission. It is intended to demonstrate, beyond any further doubt, that the warning I gave you was never a bluff." "You intend to attack us with a single ship?" Vex asked, disbelief evident in his voice, despite everything he had already witnessed over the past several days. "I intend to do exactly what I told your council I would do, if this deadline passed without a change of course," I said. I gave your empire 7 days, then 6 hours, and multiple opportunities to choose a different path. Every one of those opportunities was declined. What happens next is a direct consequence of those choices, not an act of aggression born from nowhere. I gave the order to Owen without waiting for a response from the screen, and the connection remained open as my crew moved into motion around me, calm and precise, executing a plan we had rehearsed more times than I could easily count. "Engaging targeting systems now," Owen said quietly, confirming non-lethal disable protocols across all 3 survey vessels. The Harbinger's Mercy shifted subtly beneath us as our systems came online, precise energy discharges reaching across the distance between our ship and the 3 unsuspecting survey vessels moving through the corridor. I watched on a secondary display as each vessel's propulsion systems flickered and failed in sequence, their forward momentum bleeding away into a slow, controlled drift, their weapons and shields disabled before any of their crews likely understood what was happening to them. Within 90 seconds, all 3 survey vessels sat completely inert in space, their systems shut down, their crews almost certainly safe, but utterly unable to continue toward the systems they had been ordered to survey. On my view screen, Fleet Marshal Vex's expression had shifted from grim resignation into something closer to genuine shock. "Your survey vessels have been disabled, not destroyed," I said calmly. "Their crews should be safe, though frightened, I imagine." This was not an act of annihilation, Fleet Marshal. It was a demonstration, precise and controlled, exactly as I promised it would be if your council chose to ignore my warning. Councillor Sorrell's face had gone pale, his earlier composure completely abandoned. "You disabled 3 of our ships without a single volley of return fire being possible. How is that even achievable with a single vessel? Because humanity does not build warships the way your empire has built ships for the last 4,000 years, I said. You have built vessels meant to project strength during centuries of peace. We have built vessels meant to end conflicts as quickly and precisely as possible, the moment they become unavoidable. This is not the full extent of what my ship is capable of, Counselor. It is the smallest possible demonstration I could offer, while still making my point unmistakably clear." I watched the 2 of them exchange a brief, stunned glance, and for the first time since our first conversation days earlier, I saw something in both their expressions that had not been there before. Not disbelief anymore, not condescension, something closer to genuine fear, the kind of fear that comes only after certainty finally arrives too late to prevent what has already happened. "What do you want from us now?" Vex asked quietly, his earlier composure completely gone. "I want your council to understand, completely and without any remaining doubt, that the warning I delivered days ago was never a negotiating tactic," I said. "Withdraw your survey vessels and any further colonial ambitions toward the Ashland corridor, immediately and permanently. This was your opportunity to see exactly what continued escalation would look like on a small scale. I sincerely hope your council does not require a larger demonstration before finally accepting the boundary I described from the very beginning of this encounter." Councillor Sorrell said nothing for a long moment, his expression cycling through something I could only describe as the slow, painful process of an old and confident civilization finally confronting a truth it had never needed to face before. "I will relay everything that has happened to the full council immediately," he said finally, his voice noticeably smaller than it had been just minutes earlier. "I would encourage you to do so quickly," I said. "And I would encourage your council to remember that this was the smallest possible response available to me. I do not wish to demonstrate anything larger, Counselor. I sincerely hope your empire finally understands that the choice to avoid that outcome remains entirely in your own hands." The connection ended, and I stood quietly on my bridge, watching the 3 disabled survey vessels drift slowly in the dark distance beyond my viewport, their crews almost certainly shaken but alive, exactly as I had intended. Grace turned to look at me, her expression somewhere between relief and lingering tension. "Commander, do you think this will be enough to convince them?" I considered the question carefully before answering, feeling the quiet hum of my ship around me, feeling the weight of everything that had happened over the past several days finally begin to settle into something resembling clarity. "I do not know," I said honestly. "I hope it will be. I hope this council finally understands that humanity's warnings are not meant to test their patience. but to prevent a far greater cost than the one we just demonstrated. But empires built on 4,000 years of unbroken peace do not change their assumptions easily, Grace. I fear this may only be the beginning of what it takes for them to fully understand what they are truly dealing with. Owen looked up from his console, his voice quiet but steady. Commander, the 11 warships surrounding us haven't moved. I don't think they know how to respond to what just happened. Then we wait, I said. We wait, and we watch. And we hope that what just happened here today is enough to prevent something far worse from happening tomorrow. Outside my viewport, the 3 disabled vessels continued their slow, silent drift through the cold expanse of the Ashland corridor, a quiet and undeniable proof that the warning delivered days earlier had never been an empty threat, and that the countdown toward something far larger than any of us had wanted was now, undeniably, already underway. Word of what happened in the Ashland corridor spread through the Kalan Dominion faster than any official channel could contain it. I learned this not from my own sensors, but from a growing flood of transmissions that began reaching my ship within hours of the incident. Some official, some clearly leaked from frightened crew members, aboard the disabled survey vessels, all of them carrying the same undercurrent of confusion and rising panic. An empire that had not faced a genuine external threat in 4,000 years suddenly found itself confronted with proof that such a threat existed, and worse, that it had already demonstrated its capabilities without suffering so much as a scratch in return. Grace monitored the growing wave of communications from her station, her expression tightening with each new transmission that crossed her console. Commander, I'm picking up a surge of encrypted traffic, moving between several outer colonies, bordering the corridor. It looks like word has already reached beyond official council channels. That was likely unavoidable, I said. News like this rarely stays contained for long, especially among people who have never needed to manage this kind of situation before. Within a day, the first reports of unauthorized evacuations began appearing on our sensors. Civilian transport vessels, far more numerous than any official record could easily explain, began departing from smaller settlements along the outer edge of Dominion territory nearest to the corridor. Some moved toward the Dominion's core worlds, others scattered further outward, away from both the corridor and the human presence that had suddenly become the most urgent topic across every channel of Dominion communication. They're panicking, Owen said quietly, watching the growing pattern of ship movements on his display. This isn't organized evacuation, Commander. This is fear spreading on its own, faster than their government can manage it. I felt a quiet, uncomfortable weight settle over me as I watched the pattern unfold. This was never what I had wanted. I had hoped for careful diplomacy, for a council wise enough to recognize a genuine warning and adjust course before anyone needed to feel fear at all. Instead, I was watching an entire region of space descend into uncertainty because their leadership had waited too long to take a simple truth seriously. Fleet Marshal Vex contacted me again, less than a full day after the disabling of the survey vessels, his expression heavier and more exhausted than it had been during any of our previous conversations. Commander Voss, he said, I wanted to inform you directly that the situation across several of our outer colonies has become increasingly difficult to manage. Reports of your ship's capabilities have spread well beyond official channels, and many of our citizens are choosing to relocate away from the border regions entirely. I understand that must be difficult for your government to manage, I said. I want to be clear, Fleet Marshal, that this was never my intention. I did not wish for panic. I wished for your council to understand the seriousness of the warning I delivered, so that a demonstration like the one in the corridor would never become necessary in the first place. I believe you, Vex said quietly. But intention and consequence are not always the same thing, Commander. Whatever your reasons, our people are now afraid in a way they have not been in living memory. Many of them do not understand what humanity truly wants from us, only that a single ship was capable of disabling 3 of our vessels without effort, and that your council, or whatever governing structure your species relies upon, has apparently sanctioned such an action. I considered his words carefully before responding, feeling the full weight of the situation settle across my shoulders. Fleet Marshal, I would ask that you help relay something important to your people, if you are able. Humanity does not want your empire's collapse. We do not want the destruction of your colonies, or the suffering of your citizens. We wanted, From the very beginning, only the withdrawal of colonial ambitions from a corridor essential to our own survival. That message has not changed, even now. And yet your ship alone was enough to disable 3 of our vessels without difficulty, Vex said. Many among our people now fear that if a single vessel possesses that capability, an actual fleet from your civilization could threaten far more than a single corridor. I paused before answering, weighing carefully how much truth to share, understanding that whatever I said next would likely spread through the Dominion just as quickly as everything else had. I will not lie to you, Fleet Marshal, I said. My ship was sent alone specifically because a single vessel demonstrating restraint carries a different kind of message than an entire fleet arriving with the same capability. If your council had chosen a different path during those first 7 days, none of this would have been necessary at all. The scale of what humanity is capable of extends far beyond what you witnessed in that corridor, and I sincerely hope your empire never needs to see more of it than what has already occurred. Vex was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before he finally spoke again. I do not know whether to consider that reassurance or a far greater threat than the one we already understood, Commander. I would ask that you consider it neither, I said. Consider it simply the truth, offered honestly, in the hope that your council finally chooses the path that avoids any further need for demonstrations of any size. The connection ended, and I remained on my bridge for a long while afterward, watching the continued flow of civilian transports fleeing outward from the border colonies nearest the corridor, feeling a quiet, uneasy weight settle over the entire situation that no successful demonstration could fully erase. Grace approached me quietly during a lull in the incoming transmissions, her expression thoughtful. Commander, do you think we made the right choice? Disabling those ships, I mean. It clearly proved your point, but look at what it's caused. I considered her question seriously before answering, unwilling to offer an easy response to something that deserved genuine reflection. I think, I said slowly, that every alternative available to us would have led to a worse outcome eventually. If we had done nothing, their expansion would have continued into territory essential to our own survival, and the conflict that followed would likely have cost far more lives than 3 disabled survey vessels ever could. What we are witnessing now is fear, Grace, not tragedy. Fear can be addressed, corrected, and eventually calmed if the Dominion's leadership finally chooses honesty over pride. Tragedy, once it occurs, cannot be undone. I hope you're right, Grace said quietly. So do I admitted. More than I think you realize. Over the following 2 days, the situation across the Dominion's outer territories continued to shift in ways that made clear just how deeply the incident in the corridor had unsettled an empire that had never truly needed to confront genuine uncertainty before. Reports continued reaching my ship of colonies quietly reinforcing their own defenses, of merchant fleets rerouting away from border regions entirely, of ordinary citizens across dozens of worlds suddenly aware, for the first time in their lives, that the peace their empire had enjoyed for 4,000 years was not something guaranteed to last forever, simply because it always had before. Daniel Cole found me alone on the bridge during one of the quieter stretches of that second day, his expression more contemplative than I had seen from him since our arrival at the border. Commander, he said, do you think they'll finally back down now, after everything that's happened? I looked out at the stars beyond my viewport, thinking of Counselor Sorrel's pale, shaken expression, of Fleet Marshal Vex's quiet admission that he no longer knew whether my honesty offered comfort or deepened his people's fear, of the countless civilian transports still fleeing outward across Dominion space in search of a safety they were no longer certain still existed. I believe they finally understand the warning was real, I said. Whether that understanding is enough to change 4,000 years of assumptions about how conflict works, and how quickly it can end when a species like humanity decides enough warnings have already been given, remains to be seen. I hope it is enough, Daniel. I truly do. But hope, as I have said more times than I can count over these past several days, has never once been a reliable strategy on its own. Outside my viewport, the 11 Dominion warships still surrounding my position had begun, slowly and hesitantly, to shift their formation, no longer holding a defensive perimeter around a single human vessel, but repositioning instead toward the deeper reaches of Dominion territory. as though even they were no longer entirely certain what role remained for them to play in a situation that had already spiraled so far beyond anything their long history had prepared them to face. It was Perrin Octa, the same scholar who had urged caution during the original council debate, who finally uncovered the piece of understanding that changed how the Dominion viewed everything that had happened. I learned of this development through Fleet Marshal Vex, who contacted me nearly a week after the incident in the corridor, his demeanor noticeably different from our previous conversations. Where before he had carried the careful formality of a military officer following difficult orders, now he seemed almost eager to speak, as though he had finally found language that made sense of everything his empire had witnessed. "Commander Voss," he said, "I wanted to share something with you, if you are willing to hear it. One of our scholars has spent the past several days studying every fragment of human historical record our intelligence services have managed to gather over the years since your species first appeared on galactic scanners. I believe he has found something important, something that may finally explain why our council so badly misjudged this entire situation." "I would be glad to hear it," I said, genuinely curious what conclusions Acta might have reached from records that were, at best, fragmentary and incomplete. "Counselor Octa discovered that humanity's approach to conflict follows a consistent pattern throughout your recorded history," Vex continued. "Your species does not escalate slowly, the way ours does, testing boundaries gradually before committing to full conflict. Instead, humanity issues clear warnings, and when those warnings are ignored, your species responds immediately with overwhelming and decisive action, specifically designed to end the conflict as quickly as possible, rather than allow it to continue over an extended period." "That is an accurate assessment," I said. "Humanity learned, across many difficult periods in our own history, that prolonged conflict causes far more suffering than a swift and decisive resolution, even one that appears disproportionate in its initial application of force. We do not view overwhelming response as escalation. We view it as the fastest path back to peace, once peace has already been rejected through inaction or aggression." "That is precisely what Octa concluded," Vex said. "He believes your warning to our council was never a bluff intended to gain leverage in a negotiation, the way such warnings often function among the species we have encountered before. He believes it was, quite literally, a description of exactly what would happen, delivered with total honesty, because your species does not consider deception a useful tool in matters of genuine survival." I felt a quiet sense of relief settle over me as I listened, the first genuine relief I had experienced since this entire encounter began. "I am glad someone within your council finally understood that, Fleet Marshal. I have tried, throughout every conversation we have shared, to be as transparent as possible about our intentions and our capabilities. I did not want your empire to suffer through misunderstanding, when clarity was always available to you. I believe many among our leadership finally understand that now," Vex said, "though I fear the understanding arrived at a significant cost to the trust our people once held in their own council's judgment." "That is a cost your leadership created for themselves, Fleet Marshal, through their own choices," I said gently. "I do not say that to place blame carelessly, but simply because it is the truth. I gave your council every reasonable opportunity to avoid this outcome. What has happened since is the result of decisions made entirely within your own government, not mine." Vex was quiet for a moment before responding. "I do not disagree with you, Commander. I only wish we had understood your species sooner, before 3 of our vessels needed to be disabled in order to make the lesson unmistakably clear." News of Acta's findings spread quickly through the upper levels of Dominion leadership, and within days, I began noticing subtle shifts in how neighboring powers along the Dominion's borders began responding to the situation as well. Reports reached my ship of smaller governments and independent trading fleets throughout the region, quietly recalling their own vessels from anywhere near human-adjacent space, choosing caution over curiosity, now that the nature of humanity's warnings had become impossible to dismiss as mere posturing. Grace brought one such report to my attention during a quiet stretch on the bridge, her expression thoughtful, as she reviewed the data crossing her console. "Commander, it looks like word is spreading well beyond Dominion space now. I'm seeing fleet movements from at least 3 other regional powers, all pulling back from areas near our territory." "That does not surprise me," I said. "Fear moves quickly once it has a clear and undeniable example to draw from. I imagine every government within transmission range of this incident is now reconsidering how carefully they wish to test humanity's patience in the future. Is that a good thing? Grace asked, other powers being afraid of us? I considered her question carefully before answering, understanding that it deserved an honest response rather than a simple reassurance. I do not take pleasure in being feared, Grace, I said. I would much rather be understood. But understanding and fear are not always separate things, especially among civilizations that have never needed to imagine consequences before encountering them directly. If this fear prevents future conflicts from occurring in the first place, then perhaps it serves a purpose beyond simple intimidation. I would rather other powers avoid testing our boundaries out of clear understanding than stumble into the same mistake the Dominion Council very nearly made. 2 days later, Councillor Sorrell contacted me directly, for the first time since the disabling of the survey vessels. His demeanor entirely transformed, from the confident, slightly condescending figure I had first encountered at the beginning of this entire situation. He appeared tired, older somehow, carrying the weight of a decision that had cost his empire more than he had ever anticipated when he first dismissed my warning as an overreaction. "Commander Voss," he said, "I wish to speak with you personally, rather than through intermediaries. I have reviewed Councillor Octa's findings regarding your species' historical approach to conflict, and I believe I owe you a more complete acknowledgement than I have offered so far." "I am listening, Councillor," I said. "When you first arrived at our border, I believed your warning to be theater," Sorrell said. "I believed, as many among our council did, that no civilization would risk direct conflict with an empire as old and established as ours, without first attempting years of careful negotiation. I did not understand that your species considers such delay to be a greater risk than swift and honest action. I am sorry it required the disabling of 3 of our vessels, and the fear that has since spread across our outer colonies, for that understanding to finally reach me." I felt something ease slightly in my chest at his words, though I remained careful not to let relief override the caution that had guided every decision throughout this encounter. "I appreciate your honesty, Councillor," I said. "I did not wish for any of this to unfold the way it has. I hope your council now understands that humanity's warnings, however unfamiliar they may seem when measured against your own history, are never given carelessly, and never given without genuine intention behind them." "I believe we understand that now, quite thoroughly," Sorrell said. "The Council has already begun formal discussions regarding the complete and permanent withdrawal of any colonial ambitions toward the Ashland Corridor. I wished for you to hear this directly from me, rather than through a formal diplomatic channel that might feel less sincere." "Thank you, Councillor," I said. "I hope this marks the beginning of a relationship between our 2 civilizations, built on clearer understanding than the one we started with." "As do I, Commander," Sorrell said quietly, "though I suspect it will take our people a great deal of time to fully recover from the fear this encounter has caused. I only hope that fear eventually settles into respect, rather than something more difficult to repair." The connection ended, and I remained alone on my bridge for a long while afterward, watching the quiet stars beyond my viewport, feeling the first genuine sense that this long, difficult standoff might finally be approaching a resolution neither side would need to regret in the years ahead. The formal withdrawal came exactly 9 days after my ship first arrived at the edge of Dominion space, delivered not through Councillor Sorrell or Fleet Marshal Vex, but through an official transmission broadcast across every channel the Dominion maintained, intended for both their own citizens and for any human authority listening from beyond the border. I watched the broadcast from my bridge, standing quietly beside Grace's station, as the recorded message played across our main view screen. A senior member of the Dominion Council I had not yet spoken with directly, an elder statesman named Corvin Thess, addressed the message with a solemnity that suggested the full weight of what was being announced had finally settled across the entire council chamber. "To the citizens of the Kalan Dominion, and to the human authority known as Commander Elias Voss," Thess said, his voice carrying none of the earlier condescension that had characterized every previous conversation between our 2 peoples. "The Dominion Council has formally voted to withdraw all colonial ambitions from the Ashland Corridor, effective immediately and permanently. We acknowledge that our initial response to humanity's warning fell short of the caution such a warning deserved, and we extend our sincere hope that this withdrawal marks the beginning of a relationship between our civilizations built on clearer understanding moving forward. The broadcast continued for several more minutes, outlining logistical details of the withdrawal. Formal apologies extended toward the crews of the 3 disabled survey vessels for the confusion and fear the incident had caused among their families, and a cautious invitation for future diplomatic contact between humanity and the Dominion, conducted through channels neither side would need to enter with quite so much uncertainty as before. When the broadcast finally ended, I stood quietly for a long moment, feeling the full weight of everything that had happened over the past 9 days finally settle into something resembling closure. "It's over," Grace said softly, more statement than question. "For now," I said, "I believe this particular matter has reached its resolution. Whether the broader relationship between our species proves as peaceful as this outcome suggests remains to be seen, but I am hopeful, Grace. Genuinely hopeful, for the first time since we arrived here." I sat down at my console and began composing my official report to command, describing the events of the past 9 days with the same careful honesty I had extended to every conversation with the Dominion Council throughout this entire encounter. I described the warning delivered on our first day of contact, the 7 days extended for consideration, the survey vessels that entered the corridor despite that warning, the 6-hour final deadline, and the precise, controlled response that followed when that deadline passed without change. I described, too, the panic that spread across Dominion territory in the days that followed, the quiet unraveling of confidence in a government that had never before needed to imagine a threat it could not simply outlast through patience, and the eventual understanding that finally emerged once scholars within their own ranks studied humanity's history closely enough to recognize the pattern our species has always followed. Warn clearly, act decisively if the warning is ignored, resolve the conflict as quickly as possible, minimizing suffering wherever restraint allows it. Mission successful, I wrote at the conclusion of my report. 0 human casualties. Minimal Dominion casualties, limited entirely to the temporary disabling of 3 survey vessels, with no loss of life reported among their crews. Diplomatic relationship established under significantly clearer terms than existed prior to this encounter. I transmitted the report and sat quietly at my station for a long while afterward, thinking of everything that had unfolded since our arrival at this border. I thought of Fleet Marshal Vex, who had argued against his own council's early complacency and had ultimately proven wiser than many of his peers. I thought of Councillor Sorrell, whose confident dismissal of my warning had cost his empire 9 days of fear and uncertainty, before finally giving way to honest acknowledgement. I thought of Perrin Octa, the quiet scholar whose careful research had finally provided the understanding that ended this standoff, before it could grow into something far larger and far more costly for everyone involved. News of what had happened at the Dominion border continued spreading throughout the wider galaxy in the weeks that followed, carried by merchant fleets and diplomatic channels far beyond anything either humanity or the Dominion had directly controlled. I received periodic updates from Command, detailing how other regional powers had responded to the incident, many of them quietly adjusting their own policies regarding territory near human space, choosing careful respect over the kind of complacent assumption that had so nearly led the Dominion into a conflict they were entirely unprepared to survive. 3 weeks after the formal withdrawal, I received one final transmission from Fleet Marshal Vex before my ship was recalled from the border to return home. His expression, when it appeared on my view screen, carried none of the tension or uncertainty of our earlier conversations, replaced instead by something that looked, unmistakably, like genuine respect. "Commander Voss," he said, "I wish to speak with you one final time before your ship departs our border. I have thought a great deal about everything that transpired between our two peoples over these past several weeks, and I find myself curious about something I never had the opportunity to ask you directly. I am happy to answer, if I am able," I said. "What does humanity actually want from the rest of the galaxy?" Vex asked. "Your warning was clear enough regarding the corridor, and your actions since then have proven, beyond any remaining doubt, exactly how seriously you meant every word of it. But I find myself wondering what your species truly seeks, beyond the boundaries you have already made clear to us." I considered his question carefully, understanding that my answer would likely be remembered and repeated far beyond this single conversation, shaping how the Dominion, and perhaps other powers watching from a cautious distance, would come to understand humanity moving forward. "We already told you what we wanted, Fleet Marshal," I said. "We wanted your council to withdraw from a corridor essential to our survival, delivered honestly and without deception, so that neither of our peoples would need to suffer through a conflict that could have been avoided entirely. That is all we asked for from the very beginning. I understand it may be difficult for an empire built on 4,000 years of careful diplomacy to accept that a warning could be exactly what it claims to be, nothing more and nothing less. But I hope, after everything that has happened here, your people finally understand that humanity says precisely what it means and expects to be taken at our word the first time, rather than only after harder proof becomes necessary." Vex was quiet for a long moment, considering my answer carefully before finally responding. "I believe we understand that now, Commander, quite thoroughly. I only hope the rest of the galaxy learns that lesson with less difficulty than we required." "So do I, Fleet Marshal," I said quietly. "So do I." The connection ended, and I gave the order for the Harbinger's Mercy to begin its final departure from Dominion space, watching through my viewport as the border I had arrived at 9 weeks earlier slowly faded into the distance behind us, replaced by the quiet, familiar stars leading back toward home. Grace approached my chair as we prepared for the jump back into faster-than-light travel, her expression thoughtful and calm, in a way that told me she, too, had spent these final weeks reflecting on everything our small crew had witnessed and accomplished together. "Do you think this changes things, Commander?" she asked quietly. "For humanity, I mean. For how the rest of the galaxy sees us now." I looked out at the stars one final time before answering, thinking of everything that had unfolded since our arrival, of an empire that had never known war finally understanding, through nothing more than careful honesty and precise restraint, exactly what humanity truly stood for. "I believe it changes everything," I said finally. "Not because we sought conflict, Grace, but because we refused to let a misunderstanding grow into something far worse than it needed to be. I believe the galaxy will remember this moment for a very long time, not as the beginning of humanity's nightmare, as some may choose to call it, but as the moment an old and peaceful empire finally understood the value of listening the first time a warning is given, rather than waiting until proof becomes the only language left that anyone is willing to hear." The Harbinger's Mercy slipped quietly into faster-than-light travel, leaving behind a border that had nearly become a battlefield, carrying home instead the quiet, hard-won proof that clarity, honesty, and restraint, applied at exactly the right moment, could accomplish far more than conquest ever would.